I had to leave a 5-bedroom house, my car behind, my dogs behind, my mother behind.
There are voices out there, including the South African president, who has called you cowards.
Yeah.
You've got other Afrikaners who are saying that you're not refugees, you're opportunists, that you've abandoned the country. What would you say to those people?
I had to leave a 5-bedroom house, which I will lose now because I'm not going to pay for it. My car behind, my dogs behind, my mother behind. I didn't come here for fun, but my children are safe. If you're white, you're wrong in South Africa. You're a land thief, you are a racist. I had nothing to do with apartheid. Nothing, nothing, nothing.
Well, hello, boys and girls. Do y'all remember all these smiling faces that arrived here about a year ago?
Farmers are being killed. I have people that live in South Africa. They say it's a terrible situation taking place. So we've essentially extended citizenship to those people and to escape from that violence and come here.
All of these folks who've just come in today have been.
Well, I remember them. They got off of that plane smiling like they had just landed in Disney World. They thought they was about to come over here and live a life of luxury, zero labor, and all the racism their little hearts can stomach. But they are learning out the hard way that the grass is not always greener on the other side, and racism is expensive than a motherfucker. They can barely pay rent. They don't have the right clothing. They can't afford to buy the right clothing because they're barely affording rent. They barely have food, and most of them are still living out of hotels, which we know is expensive as a motherfucker. They thought they was about to come over here and be the brand new Elon Musk, arriving from South Africa. Yet another fatality of those that have blindly put their faith in Trump, racism, and hatred. Happy Black History Month.
Okay, do you remember that when Donald Trump came to office, his first move was to shut the doors on refugees, when he said that America was full and that refugees were actually destabilizing the country and that the US needed to protect its borders at all costs. And then suddenly, on a twist of the story, there was an exception, and it was a small group of white refugees from South Africa, commonly known as Afrikaners, that were fast-tracked and expedited into the US, actually, on a chartered flight, on a special refugee pathway. While refugees from actually legit war zones and legit refugees were turned away, this particular group of white refugees, I still put them in quotes because they didn't look to me like they were honestly legit refugees, they were prioritized under the claim that they were being targeted or persecuted back at home in South Africa based on the fact that they were white. Of course, that raised a lot of controversy, if you remember, and South Africa came out to boldly reject that. And even some South Africans, Afrikaners, some of them rejected it openly. But now, there are reports that coming out that those of them that took the offer are really struggling and stranded in America. And yeah, these are the consequences of playing politics on serious issues. So let's watch, and I'll be back with some good commentary.
You may recall last year we reported on the Trump administration's decision to limit the number of refugees entering the United States. That number was set at 7,500, a significant cut from the Biden era. In addition, the administration is prioritizing white South Africans for admission, a group it says faces persecution at home, something the South African government disputes. Well, now an investigation from the Free Press shows many of those white South Africans, also known as Afrikaners, are barely scraping by because of what they say are failures in U.S. government systems. Madeline Rowley is an investigative reporter for the Free Press, and she joins us now from Virginia to talk about this. And we should note the Free Press and CBS News share a parent company in Paramount Skydance. Madeline, good morning. Talk to us about the conditions some of these refugees say they are experiencing, because the administration made it seem as if they were being prioritized. They are a special group.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on. Yes, I spoke to 10 South African refugees who told me that, they came to the U.S. hoping for a better life, a better situation, just as other refugees. And the government contracts with 7 refugee resettlement agencies that are paid hundreds of millions of dollars per year to provide safe, sanitary, and affordable housing. And unfortunately, what I heard from these Afrikaner refugees is that they're spending weeks in motels in unsafe areas. They're being offered housing that is full of mold, apartments that are full of mold in expensive areas. So each refugee is allotted $2,000, and all of that has been going to rent. So they're really left with nothing. And these agencies are supposed to help them apply to jobs, obtain temporary benefits such as SNAP and Medicaid, and basically other people from the community, like neighbors, are having to step in because they just, in some cases, can't even get a hold of their resettlement agencies.
And Madeline, what jumps out to me about what you're saying is we have this almost split screen between what you're describing their life is like now and how they looked in May of 2025 when they were being welcomed here. They were holding American flags. They had smiles on their faces. When you asked refugee groups about these issues with the resettlement process, what are they telling you? How common is this?
Well, from what I could tell, there's an entire network of people as they come. People I spoke to came as soon as 2 weeks ago. And what they do is, they have a network through social media groups and WhatsApp, and they're all realizing, oh no, I'm stuck in this hotel. I only have a certain amount of food. They don't have transportation. They don't have the right clothing. I talked to 3 refugees who are in Detroit. It's very cold there. They do not have coats. So they're realizing that they really feel alone.
Y'all remember this time last year when the Trump administration brought over that group of white South Africans claiming they were facing racial persecution and injustice in their home country? I have an update. Out that the majority of them are struggling here in the United States. They are only given $2,000 a month, which typically their rent eats up, so they have no more funds for food, transportation, anything extra. They're living in Roach infested apartments. They are living in an unsafe area. It's almost as if the United States is oppressive. Tried to tell y'all. And if anything, this just further goes to show that there are flaws within our immigration system, flaws within our asylum system. There are flaws. It's not the people, it's the system. This is what happens when our politicians are more interested in using immigration as a talking point, as a tool for election, rather than an actual issue that needs to be addressed rather immediately.
Did you see this video of this woman from South Africa talking about how on a Facebook group she saw that Afrikaner refugees here in the U.S. are struggling and are thinking about going back?
Family of refugees has been placed in this town, and they have had no food. I know that there's this, and I don't know what to think because I didn't really follow it at all when it happened. But I think they were of the understanding that they were going to be arriving here to complete assistance. And I think people here thought that they were going to be arriving to a house and a job and medical insurance and a whole bunch of other stuff. And it actually isn't that way at all. There have been 4 adults in a hotel room with no money, no cell phone, no anything. And the humanitarian in me, I can't ignore the fact that these people are struggling. But there's this one side of me that's fuck that.
If you hadn't heard the story, Trump has been letting Afrikaner refugees, heavy on the quotes, into the U.S. They came here with the lie that the South African government is persecuting them because they're white. So at a time where Trump is not allowing any refugees to come into the country, he is allowing Afrikaners into the country. And like this article perfectly states, they're not refugees, they're opportunists. And these opportunists really thought that when they got to the US, they were going to get a house, a job, a car, a cell phone, health insurance completely paid for. They really thought that Daddy Donnie was going to take taxpayer money and give it to them. You know, believing all those lies that people of color come to the US to seek refugee or asylum, and then they have it on easy street, which, surprise, surprise, it's not true. And it doesn't matter how much those South Africans hate it here, they can't just go back home. Like the Department of International Relations said, these Afrikaner refugees cannot just go back to South Africa or get assistance from South Africa because they're supposed to be under the protection of the United States and Donald Trump. And if these Afrikaner refugees want to be welcomed back as citizens, they have to revoke their status in order for this to happen. So if these Afrikaners are struggling in the US and they want to go back home, basically they have to admit, we lied. I think it's kind of humorous to me that their lies have backfired on them and that Donald Trump has left them stranded. However, it's very frustrating that people who actually have to seek asylum and refuge in the US because they're trying to escape danger and persecution are not being allowed in, but these opportunists are being fast-tracked.
I was about to go to bed, but I couldn't wait till tomorrow to make this video because it's very good news. Well, non-good news for the people I'm talking about, but do you guys know what happened to the Afrikaners that claimed there was white genocide in South Africa and hightailed it to America under this administration with the hope that they'd have a better life here, claiming that there's white genocide in South Africa and South Africa's trying to eradicate the white race. All these lies that they told to get here. Listen, it's one thing to come here with dignity. I have no problem people moving here with dignity, but when you're gonna lie about your country and stir up hate and go along with this terrible thing people are saying about South Africa just because you don't like it there, because your white privilege ended with apartheid and you still had privileges but you took it for granted. Do you know what happened to those people? They are living in motels right now with cockroaches, mosquitoes, and mold, and they're complaining because all they got was $2,000 when they started. They were promised that someone would help them find a job, find housing. Nothing's happening. One guy, the best one I heard, oh my gosh, I was dying when I heard this, is they interviewed an Afrikaner, and I need to look this up to see if it's true, but this is the story, is they interviewed an Afrikaner, and he said he had to wash the car of an African-American man here. So I hope that's true. Oh my gosh, I hope that's true. That would be so delicious. You know why I'm celebrating this karma is because there's people out there that are actually suffering, that are fleeing their countries to just make a life for their families and provide and make sure their kids have a future. And they have to wait forever. And sometimes it goes 10 years before that happens, which is why they end up here undocumented. Not that they're doing anything wrong and killing people and stuff. They're just undocumented because the system failed them. And it's just too much of money and resources. Anyways, these people got the red carpet rolled out for them based on a lie. And now look what's happening. God. That is real God right there, not the nationalists that they are. The real God is acting right now and saying, oh, you want to lie? Here, this is the life you're going to have. So, shame. I wish them all the luck, but I guess they can't go back to South Africa if they claim refuge from it, right? I hope not. Gosh, I hope. Oh, it'd be so nice.
So if you've ever had trouble understanding white privilege before, this whole white Afrikaner refugee debacle might paint a clearer picture for you. This is happening at the same time the rights of others are being stripped away, ignored, and innocent people are being rounded up illegally, including those who have been protesting an actual genocide. Just to sum things up very quickly for you, there is no genocide happening in South Africa, and especially not a white genocide. There's never been a clearer example of imperialist white supremacist hypocrisy. The very same folks denying genocide in Gaza are the ones believing that there is a genocide happening in South Africa. Apparently a genocide that targets only a specific group of white people, Afrikaners, within the various other white South Africans who descended from many different groups such as the British, Greeks, Portuguese, Lithuanians. There are no claims of genocide against these white South Africans. Ask yourself why. What's really going on here? Now, I understand that many South Africans leave the country for better opportunities, and this applies to South Africans of all races. But peddling dangerous lies about the country, especially one pushed by alt-right, racist civil rights groups like AfroForum and shady ex-South African billionaires like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Dave Sachs and Joel Pollack, is just wrong. It undermines the country and it disrespects the real suffering that many South Africans, again of all races, face because of violent crime and poverty in the country. Not to mention actual refugees fleeing an actual genocide. Just stop it. It is pathetic and embarrassing.
All right, so we can unpack what really happened here. When Donald Trump returned to power in 2025, one of his first major moves was to slam, the doors on refugee admissions. That was actually even against the Constitution of America. And his argument was that refugees and asylum seekers were destabilizing America. The message was clear that America was closed. But then suddenly, it appeared that there was an exception to that rule. A small group of white South Africans, mainly these white South Africans called Afrikaners, they were the one that were prioritized under this, resettlement policy. The justification was they were victims of racial persecution in South Africa. Now, here is exactly where it got controversial. The South African government rejected the claim. Some Afrikaners back in South Africa rejected the narrative as well. And they were saying that, yes, South Africa has a serious crime rate at the moment. It's dealing with that problem. And it's maybe dealing with other problems like inequality and, violent crimes on everyone, though. Black, white, Indians, colored. It was a national crisis. It is a national crisis and not a racial crisis. It did not target these so-called white South Africans. And then this is where the contradiction became very glaring. South Africa actually has about slightly over 60 million people, if I'm not wrong, yeah? And white South Africans, this group of white people in South Africa, are less than 15% of that population of 60 million. Yet, historically, they control a massive share of privately owned land, wealth, and which is largely inherited from, the white supremacy system of apartheid back in, in the 90s. And, this doesn't mean that every white South African is rich, but really structurally, they are not a persecuted minority in the way refugees are traditionally, defined. These are actually a privileged group in South Africa. Because you can imagine 70% of land, privately owned farmland in South Africa, belongs to this group that only makes up 15% or less than 20% of the population at most. So you can now do your math that the rest of the 80% of South Africans, the majority, of course, being black, have to now scramble for the rest of the 30% remaining land. So when Trump and his brother Elon Musk back at that time, who had actually complained about immigrants from non-European countries, and of course it was more about the southern border, and he had actually expressed preference for migrants from places like Norway and Denmark. It's on record, and he suddenly carved out a space specifically for these white South Africans, and of course people noticed and people complained. People really shone the spotlight on what was happening, because at the same time, refugees from war zones, real war zones, from places that were ravaged by drought and famine, political persecution elsewhere, were being denied entry, but these people were being given entry. Against his own word, Donald Trump had said he wasn't going to take any refugees, and that's why critics say that this wasn't about humanitarian concern. It looked selective. It was selective. It looked ideological, and of course it was racial. Now, fast forward, reports are now emerging that some of those white folks who took the offer are now struggling in the US. Difficulty accessing services, basic services, housing instability, financial hardship. They're generally feeling abandoned because if American citizens are actually feeling the pinch of this Trump regime, how about people that just came to America, a few days ago? And here's the uncomfortable reality. Relocating to another country as a refugee is nothing glamorous, It's not a VIP relocation package. You're going to start from scratch. You depend on support systems. You enter as vulnerable already. And this is the reality that refugees from Africa, from the Middle East, from Latin America have always faced. And that's really what makes refugees. But then there may have been this assumption that whether spoken or unspoken, that this would be different. That because the invitation, if I can say, came under Donald Trump and his administration, because it was framed politically, because it was centered around white South Africans, that maybe the experience would have been smoother. That kind of assumption looks like it's now hitting the wall, or it has collided with reality. Donald Trump's political style, as we know, has always been one that is dramatic and it's headline driven. He acts for the camera. Big announcements, big gestures, strong rhetoric. But governing, especially refugee resettlements, that's not a profit enterprise. You don't get a lot of money from it. In fact, it's you that's going to maybe dispense money. These kind of programs, they require long-term infrastructure and consistent follow-ups and follow-throughs. That is not what a person like Donald Trump is very capable of doing. And that's the issue. If you suspend refugee programs broadly that have been working in America for many years, and then you cut back on the support systems, and then selectively admit a small group of political symbolism, I can call, you don't magically create a strong support structure for these people overnight. That is what maybe they didn't take into consideration. So now some of these very people who are held up as proof of real refugees are experiencing the same structural difficulties that real refugee communities have faced before, or even worse. There is a lesson here. Migration is not a fantasy, and it's not a land of milk and honey. America is expensive in its own. Social systems are complex, and starting over is hard. Whether you're from Africa, you're from the Caribbean, you're from South America, or you're a white refugee like this one, it's not easy. And this has also exposed something deeper, that the refugee label is powerful, but it should not be politicized, and it should not be weaponized for political gain, for cultural wars. When humanitarian policy becomes ideological theater, real humans then are the props. And when the spotlight moves on, what happens to these people that have been used for political games? They are left dealing with the consequences, and that's exactly what is happening with these people right now. Now, to be clear, really, struggling to settle doesn't mean they deserve hardship, honestly. Nobody deserves to be misled, because these people were misled, and nobody deserves instability, really. But it doesn't mean that it really means something here, that immigration decisions based on political hype, instead of a sober reality, can and will backfire. And perhaps the bigger takeaway, if South Africa's problems are national, crime, unemployment, inequality, they require national solutions. Running to another country under a politically charged narrative, doesn't really solve the problem, does not erase those structural realities, and it certainly does not guarantee comfort. These people are realizing that, the hard way. Sometimes political symbolism feels powerful only in the moment. Trump has long moved on, and he's forgotten about them anymore. And in fact, they fell off with Elon Musk. So maybe that means it's even harder for these people right now. But real life is policy, it's paperwork, it's job, it's rent, it's community, really. And that's much harder than campaign speeches, than acting for the camera. So these people are really finding it hard, and sadly, it's not that I'm happy that this is happening to them, but maybe this is just a lesson for many other people in the long term, in the long run. Yeah, I don't know what you think about this. Share with me what you think in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video.